This is a B6 revision video on evolution. So, the scientist that you need to know that was successful in describing the process of evolution was Darwin. Darwin had a theory which has now been tested and proven to be quite accurate. So, what Darwin said was that in a population, sometimes we will get variation. This is a change or a difference between organisms of the same species. Okay, so in a population, we will have variation. There will be a change. Now, this variation can be called an adaptation. Okay, this adaptation means that that organism will be better at doing something. They could be better at outrunning predators. They could be better at gaining resources like food or shelter or mates. Because they've had this adaptation, which makes them better to get things they need to survive, they could outlive or outcompete other organisms within that species. Because they are the ones that have survived, they've been able to get food, they've been able to fight off other competitors, they've been able to outrun predators. They have got the ability to reproduce. Now, that's what Darwin managed to figure out by himself. He didn't have the technology that we have today. Okay, we have been able to further on Darwin's research, which actually says when they reproduce, they pass on their genes. Now, these genes are the key, as they are the ones that carry the characteristic or carry the information so that the offspring will get the same variation, will have that same adaptation so that they in turn can survive, again reproduce, and again pass that beneficial gene on, that gene that's going to allow them to survive in the environment where they are living. Now, for higher trilogy, you also need to know speciation. Okay, and this is a step just before variation. Speciation is how different species have managed to evolve from one species. How have they managed to be different from that other species? And the only thing that you have to add in before this process of evolution is that some of the population were isolated. Okay, a really good example of this is the black iguanas that live in the Galapagos Island. They were isolated from the other iguanas. So they've got different characteristics. They can swim, whereas normal iguanas, that's not a popular thing for them to do. So they get isolated. Because they're isolated, they have this variation. Okay, it's an adaptation to allow them to survive in the conditions that they are now currently in. They will survive, they will reproduce and pass on their genes. A good example of evolution, because evolution can take millions of years, but a really fast and quick example that the exam boards like to use is resistance in bacteria. So let's give an example of Fred. Fred is a bacteria that lives in hospitals. Fred's got a whole family of Freds. They can all survive in hospitals. Now, most of Fred's family, when the human that Fred was living in took an antibiotic, most of Fred's family died. However, Fred had a slight variation. This variation meant that he could cope with the antibiotic. The antibiotic wasn't going to kill Fred the bacteria. So, Fred the bacteria didn't die like the rest of his family. He was able to carry out a very quick type of reproduction known as asexual reproduction, which means all of Fred's offspring are identical to Fred's. Okay, so Fred's had this variation. He's managed to survive the antibiotic, killed off the rest of Fred's family. Fred then survived. He was able to reproduce asexually through mitosis. He's then passed on the gene that made he could survive the antibiotic to the rest of Fred's offspring, which now means if the human tries to take the antibiotic again, that Fred's offspring are not going to die. Which leads us nicely on to extinction. Now, this happens when the organism is not suited to their environment. Darwin's theory of evolution is called survival of the fittest. Okay, sometimes this is referred to as natural selection. However, if you are not the fittest, so if you're not best adapted, then you can become extinct. Now, the reasons for this, the reasons that you might not be suitable, is because your environment might change. And you can no longer cope with the environment, such as temperature, or your habitat's been destroyed. You can't adapt to find a new habitat or to cope with the new temperatures. There could be a new predator, which you are not adapted to outrun or escape. There could be a new disease, which you are not resistant to. Or there could be a new competitor, which you cannot outcompete for food or for mates. Now, these last three are a biotic factor. They are a living factor that can cause you to become extinct, compared to the environmental change, such as habitat being destroyed, which is an abiotic factor.